Welcome, Cody.
All right, thanks for having me.
Can you start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your work as an anthropologist?
I'm the CEO of Global Migrations Project. It's a nonprofit that focuses on human migrations, but I'm also a graduate anthropology student at Harvard University in my last little bit before I graduate and to move on to a different stage in life.
So what inspired you to retrace the Klondike Gold Rush route?
So as a little kid, I was really into mining. I grew up in central Idaho, and there weren't a lot of things that I liked to do in town, but we were surrounded by mines. All the mountains around us had mines. So I would explore them as opposed to like going into town and watching movies and stuff. And as I grew up, I always read stories about the Klondike Gold Rush. I watched movies about it. I read a lot of Jack London, and it always fascinated me, especially like the harshness of the whole interior of the Yukon Territory, the difficulty of getting through Alaska. So I really wanted to check it out firsthand. And I think it makes for a great understanding of why people would take a really difficult migration route to a place like the Klondike River area.
And can you tell us a little more about where the Klondike is and how to get there?
So the Klondike is in Yukon Territory, and it's about 6 hours north of Whitehorse, which is the biggest city in Yukon Territory. It's quite a jaunt. You can fly into Whitehorse, or for me, I live in Alaska, so I moved up here to explore all the mining history. It's an 18-hour drive at the top of the world highway is closed to get to the Klondike River, and it comes out of the Ogilvy Mountains and into the Yukon River. The confluence is right by where modern-day Dawson City is. And then the Klondike River itself actually wasn't the river that they were doing a lot of the prospecting and mining on. It was little creeks that flowed into the Klondike Bonanza and so forth.
Cool. So from an anthropological perspective, what were you hoping to gain by experiencing the trail firsthand rather than just studying it in archives or texts?
Well, one of the big things that people always talk about when I read these stories about taking the Chilkoot is how difficult it was. And I was curious to see if it lived up to the hype that I'd read. And I wanted to find out just how much of a trek it was, understanding that I would only be doing it once for this trip as opposed to like 25, 30, or 40 times like the Klondikers did. I also wanted to see kind of the environment that they were in, what it was they were exposed to, and I wanted to put images to the places that I'd read about and the old pictures that I'd seen, because there's no way that you can really get a good grasp of a place by looking at pictures or reading a book or even watching videos about it. I wanted to smell it, I wanted to hear it, I wanted to be there, I wanted to sleep out there, I wanted to be in the rain, I wanted to see the glaciers. So without that, I don't think that I could get a good understanding of the anthropological project that I was doing. You just can't get that experience in an office.
How did you prepare physically and mentally for this experience? It sounds like a doozy.
So it was easier than I thought it was going to be physically. I went out there in May, and at the time the pass wasn't open. There was still a lot of snow, but I went out probably just about 10 miles. It was as far as I got, and it's a 16-mile trail to the top of the summit, roughly. And so I kind of knew then what I would need to do. It's actually relatively gradual until you get to Sheep Camp, which is the last camping spot, and then it starts to really climb. So when I came back after our trip down there in May, I did just a lot of vertical training, a lot of walking, really slow, low to moderate intensity with a heavy pack over long distances. And fortunately, where I live in Alaska, we have some big mountains, so getting vertical training was pretty easy. But the one thing I wasn't able to train for was the rain, and just how much that would change the experience.
And it sounds like you're referring to that small portion of the trail, but that's just the beginning. Can you tell me more about how you trained physically and mentally, or even just gathering resources for that entire trip from Dyea, and maybe explain what Dyea is all the way to the Klondike?
Well, so the trail basically starts at this old town of Dyea, and it was the tidal flats. The boats would come up on the Lynn Canal, and they'd either dump all the stuff at Skagway, and then people would take the White Pass Trail, or they would dump everybody at Dyea, and they had big wharfs and stuff. And so they would come in at low tide, dump all the gear, everybody would have to ferry the gear onto the land where the tide wouldn't wash it away. Because if it washed it away, then they'd lose their outfit. And they were required to carry at least 1,000 pounds of gear over. So from Dai, then, they would make their way up the canyon, up to the Chilkoot Pass. And so I started at Dai, the National the National Park Service has a campground there. The trail doesn't follow the historic trail when you start it. It's actually on the other side of the river from where the historic trail was. And I think at Finnegan's Point is where it actually meets back up with the historic trail. And then you go over Chilkoot, and Chilkoot's the real famous image of everyone going up the mountain. And it's a tough climb, but it's only 3,600 feet. So really, it's just one in a very small step. And from Chilkoot, then you go down the other side, which is nice, which unfortunately I couldn't go because of some of the issues between the US and Canada. Canada does not allow people to cross the border there. But basically, that's just the first step. So physically planning for that is just one thing, basically climbing that pass. And then it's all about endurance down the other side because it's 500 miles until Dawson. And I'm going to boat it just like they did. I didn't get that chance this year. But basically, once you get all your stuff down the 34-mile trail to Bennett, you can then put a boat in and then float the Yukon River. Almost like they did. There's some dams and things that weren't there, but I think that's the next step is I'm going to have to get better at my boating capacity because the water's there. If you fall in, it's a whole different world. So.
And then didn't you go to a few other places along the route?
Yeah, so I visited like Carcross, which is really interesting because Carcross it's the town that crosses the outlet of Bennett Lake, so it's really cool. You can see Bennett where all the Klondikers came down. Then I went to Whitehorse, and I spent some time in Whitehorse, and Miles Canyon, which was the rapids, the Whitehorse Rapids that were responsible for sinking a lot of boats. That's dammed now, and the rapids aren't there, but it's still really cool because you can see the canyon, how the Yukon goes from this big river, and it gets funneled through this basalt canyon, and it comes out the other side. So when you drive from Whitehorse to Dawson, you're basically going along the Yukon River, and most of that is where obviously the Yukon is where the Klondikers went, and for most of the drive you can see parts of the trail like Five Finger Rapids and the Pelly Crossing and different things as you're coming into Dawson City. So it's pretty cool to be able to see all that.
So going back to the Chilkoot Pass, it's famously called the Golden Staircase. That's an iconic moment in Gold Rush history. And what was it like to climb it yourself?
So it's really interesting because I had a vision in my mind of something that was actually bigger than what it was. It's not to say that it wasn't imposing, but I thought that the mountains are amazing, but I thought it was just going to be bigger, like a big, huge pass. And it really wasn't. But I could see as I was walking up, so past Sheep Camp, which is the last camp where people normally camp to get up over the summit, and then to Happy Camp on the other side, the Canadian side, you can see all the stuff that they left behind. And there's this big rock called Stone House where people would basically sleep underneath it. And the two guys that brought over word of the gold strikes in the Yukon actually camped out underneath Stone House in the wintertime. One of them passed away as soon as they made it into Dai. And so it was really cool to see that place, the place that's so storied in the history. But then to go up and see on the rocks on the side of the river, there are these big buildings where they had the tramway motors and stuff that they were ferrying gear over later. It was amazing to see all that, as well as all of the artifacts that have been left, and the animal bones and the shoes and the shovels and everything that's just there. And it's in this really rough, jagged boulder field. So it would be different in the wintertime. I didn't climb it in the wintertime, but climbing over the boulders, there isn't a trail. It's a route that the rangers pick out. And you get up top and there's like engines and these big things for like the tramway systems. And there's a bunch of boats that somebody hauled up there. It's pretty amazing to be able to see all that. But it was like a dream come true after having read about it for so long, to be able to stand up there. And I got to see the sun. It peeked through for like 5 minutes before it got cloudy and started raining again. So it was like God ray moment. It was amazing.